And one of the biggest problems in our culture right now is we are not passing on the gospel. It's going to be good because you're going to get them going.
Yeah.
Well, for me, there's no separation. I mean, God created us for 7 days a week, not 1 day a week.
So, like, what's next for you now? What's on the horizon?
Welcome back to the Patros Podcast as we are embracing healthy masculinity. This is the Theology for Regular Dudes series, and we hope that you guys have been enjoying it. Today, you'll be with me, Jeff, as you guys already know, but we do have a special guest, and Jeff, I think you can introduce him.
Yeah, I'll be happy to introduce our guest. But before I do, you'll notice that we are in a different location. I can't believe you didn't say anything about that.
No, we're just going to act like it's the same exact black backdrop. And
I mean, it's brighter.
Yeah.
Usually we go for the dark
Maybe
vibe.
no one will notice.
No, they'll notice.
Like that one podcast where we just changed our hats.
I think they're going to notice. But yeah, so we're actually in the Cohatch headquarters in St. Pete, Florida, and it's actually where Man Up has our offices. And so we did another meeting here, and so they've got a podcast room here. And so it's just our guest was going to be in the area, and we thought, man, let's just try to make it easy for him. So speaking of our guest is Todd Hopkins. Todd, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Awesome. The brief background on Todd is that I met him through a young professionals group. Now, you may be looking at me going, how did you get into a young professionals group? And there was like a special waiver. I don't know how I got in. But I did get in, and it's turned into be just a great joy of my life. And Todd has been leading that for several years. But it was really out of the ministry of CBMC, which stands for?
Christian Businessmen's Connection.
Which are all over the country.
All over the world.
All over the world.
Yeah.
And an excellent and awesome way you could talk about it a little bit more, just to get plugged into Christian community, in the business community. I want you to definitely talk about that here in a little bit as we get going. But so I met Todd through a mutual friend and got introduced to the YP group. And really it's a 3-hour time block once a month where we are able to go through a set schedule of items, right?
Right.
And encourage each other, problem solve with one another, pray with each other, pray for salvation to happen in the workplace. And there's a lot of just generative thinking, like ideation, and so you would love it, Allan. It's like
would.
it's your jam for sure. But I've just been so blessed by it, and so that's how we got connected. But Todd actually has a very, very rich business background. It's one of the reasons why on this Theology for Regular Dudes Workplace Edition, we wanted to have you on, because you just have a ton of knowledge, a ton of experience, and just a ton of success. God has blessed you as you followed him in your business. So why don't you tell the folks a little bit about yourself?
Well, I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I mean, even since second grade, I actually sold bubble gum in the elementary school, public elementary school, and gum wasn't allowed. So I was selling.
So you were a criminal.
Yeah, contraband.
I was selling gum on the black market, and I could name my price. And even to this day, that's probably the best business I've ever had as far as profit.
Highest
margin.
profitability.
But
It's like 200% profit margin.
I always wanted to be successful, and did my best in sports, and was like the teacher's pet, and tried to make good grades, and that's just kind of the way I'm wired. And even as I started evaluating growing up, what happens when I die, right? I mean, I would hear the preacher at church talk about heaven and hell, and I started thinking, I want to be successful. And everybody dies. I've never heard anybody argue that point. And then when we die, we either end up in heaven or hell, and I'm thinking, okay, heaven's like the successful place. So what do I need to do to make sure I'm going to heaven? And it was explained to me really through the ministry of CBMC by a business guy, young business guy, said, hey, it's a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, to receive Jesus as your Lord and Savior. And once you do that, and the price he paid on the cross gets applied to your account for your sins, then you can go to heaven. And even in the Bible, Jesus said himself, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. no man come to the Father except through me.
That's
right? So I made a decision October 15th, 1989, and I prayed and received Jesus as my Lord and Savior. But when I did that, I didn't just pray to receive him as my Savior so I could go to heaven. I actually prayed to receive him as my Lord, which means I made a commitment to him that, God, if you can help me to understand what you want me to do, I'll do my best. Didn't know what I was getting myself into, but I was committed. And part of that was he called me to that ministry of CBMC, and been involved with that for the last 35 years. And so I'm always just saying, God, what is it that you want me to do? And then, of course, I'm all over the board as to my success rate in getting that done. But my goal is to be as obedient as possible. Including in the marketplace.
Well, and that's so. Speaking of the marketplace, right? You started Office Pride. All right, you're the founder, the CEO. Well, CEO emeritus now, I guess. But tell us a little bit about that journey, because and just to kind of give you a little background on the Patros podcast, Patros, and for those who've just stumbled on this podcast and you're hearing it for the first time here, what is this all about? Patros is Greek for father, but it means so much more than that. It means the person in the tribe who is kind of like that guy that we go to, right? Like he's got the wisdom, he's got the answers, and he's just been around. A lot of times it's just an older dude. It's just someone who's been around the block. I mean, that's not the case here. That's not the case here.
Successful.
But someone who's been around the block, they understand a little bit, but they have a wisdom, and I think of it as a sage, right? It's like the sage in the group. It's like the guy who he just kind of knows, and you know, the guy, he could be sitting in the corner for an hour meeting, and you're like, man, is this guy ever going to talk? And he talks for 3 minutes.
And it's more value.
And it's more value than everybody else, right? That's kind of the idea with Patros. But as Christian men, we want to be passing this on. And one of the biggest problems in our culture right now is we are not passing on the gospel. We are not passing on this good news that we hold. And we sometimes separate, the marketplace and our faith. Like there's a separation of
the secular
church and and Jesus doesn't want us to do that. He said go and make disciples. And if you think about it like this, right? You've got, if we say 24 hours, just to make it simple, you sleep 8 hours, you're at work 8 hours, and then you play 8 hours. So of those 24 hours in a day, a third of them you're sleeping, so those don't count. So half of your waking hours are spent in the marketplace. And so you got started in the marketplace, and you were an entrepreneur, but then you started this Office Pride thing, which just blew up and had so much success. So talk about that journey a little bit.
Well, it started as a college research paper. So I was doing my MBA at Butler University and was in an entrepreneurship class and started thinking about what I really wanted to do. And I wanted to start my own business. And then I saw an independent research project you could do and get 3 class credits. And so I submitted that I would do a research project on how to franchise in the janitorial industry. And so it got approved, and my last class at the MBA at Butler was to this project. So I did my research, talked to people in the industry. If you had to start over again, knowing what you know now, how would you create the perfect commercial cleaning company? And that was how Office Pride got started, because I took that paper, which was also the expansion strategy was franchising, and I took that paper and created the real business. And from the beginning, God had called me to honor him with the business. So I didn't know for sure what that was going to look like, but I knew I wanted to do that, right? Because for me, there's no separation. I mean, God created us for 7 days a week, not 1 day a week. Not 1 day to go worship. We're supposed to worship him actually with our work, all 7 days. So I just started by saying I want to honor God with the business. Honor God's been a core value at the top of our core values list since the beginning. And then God just started blessing it. But I'd say I did a lot of things in my own strength, and I struggled. And there was a time when I was kind of waving the white flag a little bit. Like, I wasn't going to make it. Didn't have any money. I thought I could conquer the world in sales. Wasn't getting customers. And when I finally prayed and just turned it over to God to say, God, this isn't working. I thought you were calling me to this, but if this is your will, it'd be your will that we would be successful. It'd be your will that I'd be able to provide for my family. And I was just about ready to throw in the towel, and it's like God said, okay, now that you've turned it over to me, because I said, God, if this is your will, then I'm just going to have to turn it over to you. And it's like he said, let me show you how to run this thing. And then all of a sudden, it's like I would call somebody, and the gatekeeper would be in the bathroom, and the decision maker would answer the phone. And I remember got my first large contract that way. I'd been following up on this proposal for months, and I couldn't get to this guy. And then when I finally got to him, he says, well, it looks like you guys got it. I mean, it was that simple. And I just would pray, thank God for that, and then I'd have the boldness to make another call. And so then one by one, we started adding customers, and we started adding employees, and eventually franchisees. And then 30 years later, it's a faith-based commercial cleaning franchise system. We often joke around that it's like the Chick-fil-A of commercial cleaning. Or maybe they're the Office Pride restaurant.
Restaurants, yeah, let's go with that.
But God's really blessed it, and it just amazes me what he continues to do. And so now we're 150 franchises in 28 states.
Wow.
And there's about 6,000 people out there every night cleaning buildings, wearing Office Pride uniforms, and to God be the glory, right?
Man, isn't that awesome?
Yeah.
Like, I just love a good old-fashioned American capitalism success story.
So when you did the research on it, at what point was there the flame to now take this and build it? Was it at its infancy before? So you took it
before the project. I wanted to do it, but I saw the opportunity to do my research, create my business plan, and get class credit. I thought, this is a good thing. Gotcha. So I was writing the business plan
as you were going.
Was the paper.
Yeah.
With the intent to start the business.
And then as you've built everything out, what, in the journey, I guess on the timeline of the journey, at what point did you hit where it was like, this is what I envisioned, but we're going to keep going? Is how some people have a vision, I want to hit $1 million in sales or services this year, or if that's their goal for life. Was there a point that you hit where that was what you envisioned in the beginning and you reached it, but then there was a desire to still keep growing?
So that's an interesting question. I think there was the early stage 6 months in where I was not hitting it and was starting to question, God, did you really call me to do this? Yeah. And when I finally turned it over to him, then it started to take off.
Yeah.
But as far as keep going, no, I love growing. Gotcha. And I felt like, God just kept calling me to bigger and better and to impact, more people. This can impact more people. Yeah. And it was fun. And so we just kept on going.
So that's definitely been just something where you're like, it's open-handed. It's not that you have this one vision, but you've just said, God, I will just keep saying yes, and this business is yours.
Yeah. And then, 30 years later, things changed, and God is now leading me in a different direction. Still part of the Office Pride, but not running that day to day anymore. So so I think the key is just constant prayer, and there's always tons of questions, and God's got a lot going on, and He's got big plans, and His plans are bigger than our plans, right? The Bible says that, so we have to be willing to embrace it.
But and in doing all of that, right? You had mentioned this in other conversations that, man, for as big as Office Pride was, maybe that was just the sliver of what he's preparing me for. So what's next for you now? What's on the horizon?
It's hard to say. I'm doing some business coaching, and then I've created a company called the Strategic Thinking Network, and so the goal of this organization is to teach entrepreneurs and business owners how to scale their business and scale the kingdom. So it's not just honor God with the business, but how do you grow your business? How do you think about it critically? How do you take that business to the next level? But all along the way, doing it to honor God, to glorify God, to give God the credit. So I think God wants to do great things through us. So it could be. I mean, it's hard to think because this now is in its infancy, like Office Pride was 34 years ago. But, hey, it could be. And there's a lot of business owners out there that have a desire to grow, a desire to scale. They need that guidance, and they want to honor God.
Mm-hmm.
And so my goal is to combine that, create some workshops, create some coaching, and to help these people do that.
Yeah. And what's interesting is with all of your success, with all of your experience, you still have like seeds of doubt. You were sharing that. It's just like even with everything that you've done, you still are like, man, do I really do this? Do I really have something to offer? And meanwhile, you've got like thousands and thousands of people who are benefiting from what happened in your brain. So can you walk us through that a little bit? Because I think that's important for guys to understand. Oftentimes we put on this front that we've got it all figured out all the time. And what I found is hardly anybody actually has it figured out. We're just posturing a lot. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have authority in some areas. We don't have knowledge, but the enemy has a way of like getting in and causing you to doubt. So Can you just speak to that a little bit? Because every guy experiences it.
Well, I mean, if God is calling us to do something, Satan's going to be against it. So if for every ounce of excitement and passion I would have to do this new thing, Satan is going to try to knock my legs out from under me in a number of different ways. But for sure, he's going to try to discourage. He's going to try to create doubt, all these different things. So there is spiritual warfare going on.
Yeah.
And the more we have a heart to be obedient to God, the more we try to like be who he created us to be, then the more we're on Satan's radar, because now we're going against Satan's plan.
Yeah.
And once Satan is unsuccessful at keeping us from being saved by grace, then he's just going to try to get us to act like we're not. And so God is saying, follow me. And Satan is going to try to create that doubt, and it happens to all of us. Unless we're sitting on the bench doing nothing, then Satan's not worried about it, and he can let you enjoy whatever you're doing. But if we really try to make a difference for the kingdom of God and let God work through us, then we have to assume Satan's going to come against it.
I remember when we had a pivotal thing that was going on with the ministry at one point, and it was a pivotal thing, and we'd had some setbacks. And I remember someone telling me, well, if Satan's going to do this to you at this point in time, then it must mean you're doing something good. And we want to support you. So I know that was a great encouragement to me, that sometimes, seeing the resistance is proof that you're actually making headway.
Wow.
So I appreciated your candor when you shared that, at a separate time. I'm like, man, that's just so good. I think guys need to hear that.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about theology in the workplace. So theology being, the study of God, right? Theos, study of God. Ology, the study of, and theos, God. So the study of God as it relates to the workplace. So if I'm going to take us to Genesis for just a bit, and then Colossians, just a couple things to meditate on. So one of the things that's been interesting, Man Up has programs that we run internationally. And in particular in Africa, some of the places where we operate, it has been shocking to find out how they view work. They view work as a curse. So work is actually cursed. And because work is cursed, it is something that you don't engage in. Because why would you engage in a cursed thing, right? Okay. And so one of the pivotal things has been going back to Genesis 1. So Genesis 1, and I'm going to pick up here in verse 26. God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. They will rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the livestock, the whole earth, and the creatures that crawl on the earth." So first of all, we see there is this dominion aspect, right? So God created man in his own image. He created him in the image of God. He created them male and female. Again, seeing the distinctness and gender there even, which I think is interesting. Both male and female having that image bearing and some kind of work, because there's some kind of dominion that we have to do, right? So that's work. So God blessed them, be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it. And then he just reiterates, rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and every creature that calls on the earth. So what is interesting is this happens in Genesis 1. Well, the fall hadn't happened yet. The curse hadn't happened yet. And God created us to work before there was ever anything wrong with the world. that is like a mind-blowing concept to the average African, at least in Ethiopia and Uganda, the places where we work. And it has totally shifted their opinion of work. We've gone to the scriptures. We've gone to say, well, what does God say about work? And what he actually says here is, I want you guys having dominion. So when you think about that concept of work, and then, the concept that, now work is hard, because it is hard. Once we sin, then, God says, hey, listen, you got thorns and thistles, and there's going to be a whole bunch of problem now. Yeah. How do you view work? And when you read these passages in Genesis, how do you take them personally into your daily interactions? Because you talk so much about that.
Yeah, well, first thought that comes to mind is like God created earth. He has authority over it, and he put us in charge of it.
That's good.
And he has the right to choose who he wants to put in charge of it. Right? And yet he put mankind in charge of it and responsible for it.
That's good.
And now that trickles all the way down to where each of us are now. And now, as men, he's putting us in charge of something. And for many of us, that could be a business, it could be a family. There's responsibilities. We all have responsibilities. I love your man up. I mean, I was talking to my son the other day, and there was a situation that came, and I said, this is one of these, because he had been traveling all day, but there still was going to be family stuff to do once he arrived. And I said, this is just one of those times you have to man up.
Man up.
And so I love the name of your ministry. So I just believe, like, if God has called us to the marketplace, he's called us to do something. He's given us responsibilities. Then I think we should have to rise to the occasion and make it happen, and be willing that, one, we don't even have to do it in our own strength. He's going to do it through us. We have to be available and willing, right? John 15:5, he says, I'm the vine, you're the branch. And if you abide in me, you remain in me, you'll bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. So whatever God's put us in charge of, he'll actually do it through us if we'll make ourselves available.
That's good.
Where we fail is we put so much pressure on ourselves that we're the ones that have to do it. God's just saying, hey, you want to really produce fruit? It's the vine that produces fruit through the branch. Branch not doing it. The vine is doing it. And so that's the formula. And it takes the pressure off. And somehow I feel like I have to remind myself of that every day, because it seems like my nature is, okay, what am I capable of? What am I not capable of? And is that how I judge what I choose to do? And yet God is saying, I made you for something great. I'm willing to work through you. Are you willing to be available?
That's good.
That's good.
With being in the business world, and I can imagine men that you disciple, so many of them are businessmen as well. How do you time management with family being your first ministry, but work being important and the discipleship being important as well? Like, time management with that, prioritization, how does that function within, your theology impacts that? And so many men, we hear the excuses all the time, like, man, I'm just so busy. I got so much going on at work,
Yeah.
The B word.
Maybe
no, this is going to be good, because you're going to get them going.
Yeah.
Well, I don't like the word busy.
Yeah.
I believe we should replace the word busy with productive. Busyness kills workplace
culture,
production, culture, everything. I believe, generally speaking, most people that say want to succeed in business, the ones that do are disciplined to do what's required to succeed, and the ones that don't have a tendency to get distracted. They have a tendency to get busy. And then but I've really done some observation on this, trying to say, what's going on here? Why are some people always too busy to hit their goals while others succeed because they had discipline to do the right things? And what I've observed, it's a heart of unwillingness. When it really comes down to it, business people want to achieve certain goals, but they're unwilling to do what's required to achieve those goals. Therefore, they look for other things to keep them busy. And then they blame busyness as the villain, when really it was a heart of unwillingness, and no one will ever admit that they're unwilling. And the same thing happens spiritually. Like God says, I got a plan for your life. Here's a calling on your life, and are you willing to do it? And everybody says yes. But then at the end of the day, they don't do what's required to pursue that calling. and they said they were too busy, but really, were they just unwilling? But yet they look for other things to keep them busy, and they use that as an excuse not to be obedient to God, not to follow God. So this whole busy, I could get on a kick about it.
No,
there's a book about it. Stop using the B word.
Stop using it's a 4-letter word. It's a 4-letter word for him. I was like, this is definitely going to make a reel.
No, because that's very much the busy doesn't mean productive. So if someone says, "Sorry, I can't disciple someone, I'm being too productive," it doesn't make sense because that's not kingdom productivity.
Yeah, and let me go to your first question on time management. One, I don't even like the concept of time management.
Yeah,
I mean, if you think about it, we can't manage time. I mean, time is time. There's 24 hours in a day. For everybody has the same amount of time. What we can control is how we use the time we have. So it should be self-management, not time management, because people will say time management and then blame time for the reason to not get something done because they didn't have enough time. But in reality, it's how do we use the time that we've been given, which is the same amount of time other people have. Okay. And then so it's how am I using my time, and am I blocking off time for family, time to balance life, time to get the work done. And then among the work, am I doing the most important things first? Or am I doing items number 7, 8, 9, 10 on my list and never getting to items number 1 and 2? So all this is really self-management. This is discipline and mindset. And time management is kind of a secondary thing. Yeah. That's the term people know. But I'm going to submit that if you want to get to a new level, start viewing it as self-management and take responsibility and ownership of how you use time.
Why is it, you mentioned that's so good. All that was so good. This is why
we completely just said we're not using any of these words anymore.
This is why I go to the YP meeting. But why do we do that? Why do we have, everybody has their list. I've got 8 things to do today or 7 things to do. Why do we do 4, 5, and 6 first? Why don't we do 1 and 2 first? Like, what's the psychology on that?
You feel good about it. There's people that when they're creating their list of things to do, they'll write something on their list that they've already completed just so they can check the box. And but at the end of the day, we have to first know how to prioritize what is the most important. Like, if I can only do one thing today, which thing must get done? And we know the most important. Most people aren't. They're 4, 5, and 6 are easy. And 1 and 2 can stay 1 and 2 for 6 months. I mean, it's crazy. I've done it. So I don't want to. I mean, I know the struggle with this, but at some point in time, we have to do a little self-management, and we say, today I'm going to do number 1. I mean, could you imagine if you only did the one thing that was at the top of your list, the highest priority every day, and you knocked out 300 a year? I mean, that would be probably a very productive year.
You'd probably have more time.
And you would have more time.
How do you think that reflects on, like, one of the words that I think of when I think of work and I think of the theology that would dictate how I would view work would be stewardship. So, like, how do you view that word stewardship in as much as the things that God has given you to do in a given day, a given season, a given whatever? How would you view that word stewardship, and what's the importance there?
Well, stewardship is, like, I felt like I was a steward of Office Pride for 30 years. Actually, the CEO we have now mentioned the other day that he feels like he is now a steward of Office Pride for a season, and that's exciting. So I think steward is just another level of acknowledging that we don't own it, we don't control it, but we're being put responsible for it. We've been given dominion over it for a period of time, and acknowledging that who has given us that is Almighty God, and that He gets the credit, and we should take that responsibility seriously. So I think when you say, "Hey, I'm a steward of something," it's a higher level of responsibility than even owning it.
Yeah. Paul says in a couple of different places, right? In I think it's 1 Corinthians 10 and Colossians 3 maybe, that whatever we do, we're to do it as unto the Lord.
Yeah.
Right?
Colossians 3:20, I think.
Yeah. So
work is unto the Lord, not as for men.
Correct. So when you think about that aspect, like, how would you encourage somebody who's maybe in a position, because I think a lot of the Allan, you speak to this a little bit, but I think there was a transition in kind of a boomer generation, kind of that, you born in maybe the 1950s or so, like you were coming off the greatest generation and starting to experience some of the fruit of their labor. And there began to be a little more choice in what you could do.
The options.
Right. You just weren't going to the factory, or you weren't working in the field for 14 hours or whatever it was. And nowadays, it's like, man, if I don't really feel like I love my job, then, I got to do something else. There's no loyalty. I mean, very little loyalty among the younger generation. You can kind of hop from here to here. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, by the way. I'm not saying that's inherently bad or inherently evil. But how do we work as unto the Lord? Like, what is our obligation if we're at a job that maybe we don't love?
Yeah.
Or, and then what is our obligation to our employers? Because so many times we want to talk about, well, the boss shouldn't do this and the company shouldn't do this. But what about just being a good employee? What does that look like?
Yeah, well, I'll give you an example. One time I was cleaning this place, and when I got in, and it was early, so early in the Office Pride story. And so I would take about any cleaning job I could get. Now I'm going in here. One of the buildings that we cleaned, the people had this rental property they wanted cleaned. I thought, okay, yeah, I'll go do that. I go in there. I didn't bid it. I didn't give them a high enough price, and I start cleaning, and it was just an endless amount of cleaning before you could even barely make a difference. Yeah. And I was in there at this point by myself. My help already had left, and already wasn't making any money on this, still more work to do. And it's like I'm starting to think, I was so frustrated. I told God, I said, God, I cannot serve this customer anymore. I don't even like this customer anymore. And it's like in my own strength, I couldn't do it. But I said, God, I will clean this property for you.
Wow.
And it gave me the strength I needed to do a great job. And that place was spotless. And I started like singing and worshiping because I had to change my attitude. Sure. And I would always teach our franchisees, hey, there are going to be some customers you're going to get to the point where you're saying that because that customer has complained unreasonably, or who knows, right? Or didn't treat you with respect. And I said, there are going to be times where you're going to say, I can't serve that customer anymore, but God, I will actually let you serve the customer through me. And then all of a sudden, the customer feels something different that they've never felt before.
That's good.
And a lot of times they'll end up being a good customer. So I shifted from serving a customer to, God, I'll do this building for you. And then, God, I'm actually going to let you serve the customer through me. And you want your customer to be happy, let God serve them through you. And so it's a different mindset. And I think there's a lot of people out there working, they may be working for an employer that they don't like anymore, or they're not happy with their work environment, and say, God, I'm just going to be available here in this place. I'll let you work through me. Let your light shine through me. Let people see there's something different about the guy that works here that's following Jesus. So that's the way I think the attitude should be. Every person that claims to be a Christian believer should be the best worker in the company.
That is good.
We shouldn't be the person that feels like we should slack off and give Christians a bad name, because people start to judge our God based on our performance.
That's good.
It's very, very dangerous. We should be the best at whatever we're doing.
That's good.
And we ask God to do that through us.
What would you say towards employers, as you like? That's towards the employee, and then towards Christian employers, same thing.
Well, as an employer, we should have that expectation, right? I mean, the expectation should be high, but we also have to set clear expectations to the employee, whether they're a believer or not, as to what is expected of them, and hold them accountable to produce that. So we have employers, like, for me, it was always hard to let somebody go that wasn't doing their job.
Of course.
Right? You hear you're supposed to hire slow, fire fast, but I never was good at that. But I got better over time, because I realized when it comes a time that somebody is not doing their job, because God has trusted me with this business. I'm a steward of this business, and I'm a steward of this position. And because of that, I've got to do the right thing and let the person go who's not honoring their word to do their job.
Yeah.
And so I realized that was part of my stewardship, and I got a little better at it as time went on.
I was thinking like that Christians ought to be the best worker and employee. And I was thinking, what if you work at a church? Like, who's the best?
Like, if every father employees a Christian,
every nonprofit Christian organization, who's the best Christian in this organization?
Be competing, yeah.
But it's so true.
That's good.
I think it's so good because work is there is a I do think that there's a vocational calling. There's there's kind of a working culture kind of movement that, and there are some organizations that do this. I want to read this quote to you and get your response to it. It says and this was in Christianity Today, the faith and work movement is leaving blue-collar workers behind. So this was an article that appeared. But the author of this said, the faith and work movement has been geared toward power and cultural influence, but the future of the movement, I believe, will be rooted in spiritual formation. Work is not only about success, influence, or even gospel impact. It's about who we're becoming as followers of Christ. Indeed, Puritans like John Cotton, who helped shape the Protestant work ethic, warned that making one's labor the chiefest good would only lead to selfish materialism. Lynn and others are right to regard a spiritual vibrancy as the foundation, not just for work, but for all of life. Can you just respond to that? Because I think there's some truth to that about looking at work as the place where spiritual formation happens in large part, that people are formed spiritually in their workplace.
Well, what your comment even about blue collar, you think about it, I like leadership and I tend to be drawn to that, but the real soldiering happens on the front line. Mm-hmm. And it's the workers that's saying, we hear them talking about this, but I remember the day, I can't explain it, but when I gave my life to Christ, things changed for me. Mm. And we have to set that example, the soldiers on the front line. So it doesn't matter if you're working on the line in a factory, what job you're doing. Yeah. God has everybody where he has them for a reason. Mm-hmm. There's somebody he's likely trying to reach around them, and same with the neighbors that we live by on our street, regardless of what street we live on. So I think God's got everybody where he has them for a reason. He may call you out of that and put you somewhere else, but while you're there, think about how God's wanting to use you and who he's wanting to influence through you. Mm-hmm. So whether it's blue collar, white collar, I don't think that matters at the end of the day. God needs his soldiers in every walk of life, every type of career, and at every level.
What would you say, just really practically, as we're kind of up against our clock here, what are maybe three, four very practical things that you would say to the Christian worker to say, here's how you can be a influencer for the kingdom. Mm-hmm. You can influence others for Christ in the workforce. Do you have because you are a faith-based, you made no bones about it. This is a Christian company. We're going to run by Christian ethics. So if you own the company, maybe speak to it if you're a Christian owner, and then maybe if you're a Christian worker and you're in that secular environment, because there's a lot of folks who are listening to this like, man, I want to make a difference, but I'm
not trying to get run out of my job.
Right, I don't want to be canceled because that kind of thing.
Yeah, obviously you have to operate within the legal realm of what's allowed in the situation you're in, and what's going to not get you fired. Right? Likely, there are a lot of people that's faced with that. But look, my answer is the same regardless of the level you're on, whether you're a business owner, you're a frontline worker, or middle manager. Jesus made it real clear in the Great Commission. He said, go and make disciples. He didn't say go and make 10 disciples, go and make 100 disciples. He said go, meaning as you go. As you go, whatever it is you're doing, be making disciples. And if you're growing a business, be making disciples. If you're working on a line, be making disciples. Set that example. He will draw people to you by how you live your life, and regardless of where your life is. Mm-hmm. So I feel like it's the same answer. Mm-hmm. And Jesus said that he will be with us. And by the way, and we're teaching people. So as we live out our faith, that's teaching other people how they can walk out their faith journey, right? Mm-hmm. And coming alongside them. And then he said he'll be with us to the end of the age. So it's actually a pretty good formula. Jesus called Peter and Andrew, and he discipled them personally. They discipled people. Paul was discipled by Barnabas, and then Paul discipled Timothy, and it's trickled all the way down to us, and our job now is to keep discipling people. Jesus says go. So he's got us all in different places. That's the way of spiritual reproduction, and that's the formula for the Christian church, really.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I was just gonna ask you, and maybe we can wrap, is when it comes to CBMC, because if you're hearing this, wherever you're hearing this, there's a good chance there might be a CBMC in your area, and I would go to the website and look and see. But I know they have something in particular called Operation Timothy, just kind of on that. Can you kind of just talk briefly about that, and if guys are looking to get plugged in, what that might look like? Yeah,
so CBMC it's actually a men's marketplace ministry. It's been around almost 100 years, 95 years now, and its mission is to evangelize the lost businessman and then to disciple the man. So you've got a goal to win people to Christ, but then also disciple them on how to be who God created them to be. And there's a program called Operation Timothy where one person is a Paul and the other one's a Timothy, and you can pour into each other's lives for a period of time. There's a 3-book study. And so that's a model that's been used for decades, now over 50 years, actually.
Wow.
So, and there's multiple generations of Timothys.
Yeah.
Where my Paul was a guy named Keith, his Paul was a person named John. I've had a Timothy, and they've had a Timothy. So, that's generational reproduction. So that's what Operation Timothy is. But CBMC, God's using it in a great way. A lot of young business people now, part of that's a huge movement right now. So you can go to the CBMC website. I can never remember if it's .com or .org, but you'll find it, connecting businessmen to Christ and our Christian businessmen connection. So around the world, a lot of times they've changed what the letters stand for, and they may say connecting the marketplace to Christ, but here it's connecting our Christian businessmen's connection.
Got it. Well, I just want to say, man, first of all, thanks for coming on. So many good nuggets here for people listening. I'm sure they wish this was probably an hour longer.
They probably ask for a 3-hour podcast with you.
Like, bring him back, bring Todd back. But I think like the essence of the Patros podcast is, it's a tool. It's a tool for discipleship. Like we want to elevate the role and the importance of discipleship. We want men out there to see that you're spending so much time in the workplace. If you're not discipling, you are, to your point, like as you go, make disciples. It should be second nature. And when you love Jesus, when he has changed you and opened your eyes to everything, and to a point we in our meeting earlier we talked about flourishing. Jesus brings flourishing in the human heart and in the human experience, and when we can experience that, there's no reason that I shouldn't be able to share that. And I think with all the emphasis on DEI and diversity and some of those things that we deal with, and some of them are, I think, well intentioned. But at the end of the day, guess what? We have a seat at the table as Christians. Like if we're going to have diversity, guess what? We are part of that diversity. We are part of that diversity. There's no reason we can't talk. There's no reason we can't share. There's no reason we can't be looking for those Timothys. And then quite frankly, one of the other points is to be looking for others to disciple us. Right? There's always somebody that's further than us. And then there's always somebody that's a little further back. And so we should be pulling men along, and then we should be reaching up for others that are looking to us. And so that's in large part what this is about. So I really appreciate just your heart for discipleship and looking at the marketplace as a place where that happens. So that's awesome.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for bringing it up.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining us as we just discussed theology in the workplace. Thank you so much for all the wisdom. I just sat and was just like soaking it up. But God bless you guys, and we'll see you on the next podcast.